So again, thank you for joining us for our AZHSI Evidence-Based Practices Nomination Process webinar. My name is Dr. Mara Noemi Lopez. I am the inaugural HSI Research Center Director at the University of Arizona, given the charge to lead many of our AZHSI Consortium initiatives. And I'm joined here by my colega. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lopez. So my name is Dr. David Ariana. I serve as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Services and Onboarding at Pima Community College here in Tucson, Arizona.
And of course, I'd like Paulette to introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paulette Nevares. I am the Student Associate for the Consortium, and I won't be speaking. I will be mostly running, but I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so a lot of the follow-up communication that you'll receive will be coming from Paulette. So thank you, Paulette, for being here and helping us facilitate. So the AZHSI Consortium was launched in 2021. The AZHSI Consortium seeks to strengthen the individual and collective capacity of Arizona HSIs to intentionally support conditions necessary for student success in Arizona. The two co-founders are Dr. Marla Franco and Dr. Ray Rivera. This evidence-based practice process is one of the 8 initiatives that are facilitated through the consortium, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So before we begin talking about the evidence-based practice process, I just kind of want to give, kind of highlight the context that we're discussing here when we talk about AZHSIs. So currently we have 21 Arizona HSIs. Those HSIs are listed here, and you'll see that we serve over 90,000 Hispanic identifying undergraduate students and over 4,000 Hispanic identifying graduate students. So this is kind of important overview as we talk about AZHSIs to kind of understand what we mean when we say that, what it looks like when we say that. And it's an intentional plug to understand your local and larger context too, as you consider submitting your evidence-based practice nomination process awards. So I wanted to add this slide here to kind of share a little bit about what the overarching goals of the evidence-based practice process is. And some of those 4 goals are, what we wanted to do is to create a process to determine what works within the context of Arizona HSIs. We also wanted to help others by informing education and community leaders, right, on practices that optimize college student outcomes. We wanted to highlight and amplify practices in producing positive student outcomes, but also positive learning environments. And lastly, we would like to, in this process and with everything that we do through this process, is to really illuminate, what's the gap, how are we attending to the gap, and opportunities to invest in closing that gap. So this is our 4th year, our 4th cycle of the EBP process. And in the last 3 cycles, we have awarded, I think we've awarded 12 now. And so far, in those first 3 years, we've had 5 Arizona HSIs represented within those 12 awarded programs. So again, we have 21 Arizona HSIs, 5 have been represented thus far. We really want to be intentional, but also increase how many AZHSIs are really sharing what works, sharing, their best practice, their evidence-based practices. So we're trying to be more intentional about our marketing, our promotion, and our information sharing to encourage more applications to this evidence-based practice process. And I'll share towards the end of the webinar the last, this year's 3 awardees with 2 AZHSIs represented. So the purpose of, the purpose of the evidence-based practice process is to create a community-informed process to identify, to review, to catalog, to highlight, and really amplify these evidence-based practices within our context. Co-founder of the AZHSI Consortium, Dr. Marla Franco, is always telling our team, us, and those that will listen, that it's important for us to know what works, right? For whom and under what circumstances. And we should all feel kind of affirmation that we can say these things if anyone asks at any given moment. This evidence-based practice process allows us to do that. It gives us the opportunity to collect the data, analyze the data, make sense of the data, and tell the story of what works for whom and under what conditions, right? And I think that the other thing that this process has illuminated, that since we've been doing it, is that the evidence-based practice process is also not a one size fits all, right? What succeeds in one community or community college or campus context may look different in another. But by naming those conditions that enable success in one context, we do still make it easier for other institutions to adapt and replicate effective strategies authentically. So that's kind of one of our overarching goals too within this process.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez. So one of the other goals that we have is we want to help support and build your understanding for what evidence-based practices are and help you hone in your practice for submission, right? We really want to see your practices be shared and documented and scaled up across institutions. And so really what we're going to do throughout the presentation is help build that understanding. I'm going to talk about and go through what an evidence-based practice is. I'm going to weave in some real life examples that we have used on my campus, and then go through, how we can hone in that application. So first, what do we mean by evidence-based practices? It really is about us demonstrating a record of success for improving student outcomes. And those student outcomes can be across the board, but it's how we document and demonstrate that. It also means that the practice has gone through a systematic review process and it's been evaluated for that rigor of evidence. And finally, it's intentionally centered on servingness. And so below that, right, you can see a quote from researchers that really helps define what we mean by evidence-based practice. So when we think about an evidence-based practice, we know that it is intentional. It is a practice that is measurable, it's documented, it can be reviewed and evaluated. And most importantly, right, it's replicable, scalable, and sustainable at the institution. And so when we think about evidence-based practices, we always have to say, well, why does this matter? It's an important way that we can tell our students' stories through a data-informed process. It really helps us identify what is working, why does it work, and for whom it works for. And so those are the key pieces of an evidence-based practice. I'm going to start off with one of the first components, and it's really at the core of it, and that's around intentionality and how we serve our students. So when we think about an evidence-based practice, it's about beginning with clearly defined outcomes. Those outcomes can vary across the board, right? I mentioned, or I'm looking at short-term outcomes. So for an example, it could be, what are we doing to increase fall to spring persistence? It could be some longer out terms. How are we increasing credential completion rates, a sense of belonging across the campus or institution, and even post-completion? We also are very intentional about who we're serving with that program or initiative, in that we are also defining what is the intervention and services within that program or initiative. And those services can range across the board as well. It could be, a new program or an existing program. It could be in the form of coaching services, mentoring, academic advising services. It could be teaching practices within the classroom. It could be learning communities. So this can exist in service and learning spaces. And I think most importantly, there's a connection to a theoretical or conceptual framework, and that it's being applied intentionally to that intervention or service. So again, that really helps us ground the practice in research, and it helps us take it from a good idea or a good thing to do or a good practice to an evidence-based practice. I mentioned I wanted to weave in some real life examples to help build that understanding. And so, thinking about intentionality, one of the things at my institution that we've been able to implement, right, is through an evidence-based practice, is we started off with looking at some desired outcomes, right? We were very intentional in what we wanted to do. So when we think about intentionality, it could be very similar to this example in increasing enrollment, but also looking at enrollment from first day to 45th day, and then even bigger picture persistence. So looking at that fall to spring enrollment. We also looked at increasing social and navigational capital. So we were really intentional. These were the outcomes we wanted to improve. This is what we were going to measure. And then we wanted to look at who would we be working with. And so we looked at our underrepresented student populations. At the community college level, we have a lot of working students, adult learners, students who are parents, but also caregivers, and commuting students. And so we wanted to really focus in on that group. And the intervention or service we identified was what we call Super Saturday registration events. It's essentially moving what we traditionally offer Monday through Friday into a weekend format with some additional services and partners available to students. And the framework that we connected this to is that community cultural wealth from Dr. Terioso. And so really looking at how we could also increase and support that the students' social and navigational capital. So moving on from that example of intentionality, I want to talk about the measurable piece of an evidence-based practice, right? And that's really how we collect our data and our metrics. And so when we talk about data and metrics, they can come from so many different sources. And so sources and some very good, solid, reliable, trustworthy sources can be from your institution. And we're going to think about student information systems. And a lot of this is really agnostic to what system you might be using. So some schools might be an Aleutian Manor School, PeopleSoft, Workday. It does not matter. Your SIS holds very valuable data and metrics that you can use to show that success or those improved outcomes. You can also rely on your institutional research office. There's a lot of reports coming out from most IR offices. And so using those reports, those dashboards, and even submitting data requests of your own to start measuring the outcomes. We can look at customer relation management systems, so your CRMs. And so anything from if you're an EAB school, Conic Ed, Slate, again, it does not matter what system you're using, but your CRMs hold very valuable data about your students and their intent and what they're trying to do at your institution. And then finally, right, we can look at our learning management system. And so seeing what our students are currently doing in the classroom environment, how we're measuring progress from that learning perspective. There's also other sources across the institution. We can think about spreadsheets, right? At the unit level, there can be forms, there could be logs that could be done through Google Forms, Smartsheets, et cetera. So there's a lot of data that exists out there outside of these larger systems. There's also third-party software. There's a lot of institutions using tools where we can look at the data those tools are collecting, bring them back in, and see how we're measuring outcomes there. Another key component, right, is looking at surveys and that qualitative perspective. So there could be pre-surveys, post-surveys, temperature checks, just kind of really honing in on what students are doing at that time or how they're feeling. And then again, that qualitative data can extend beyond surveys to focus groups, interviews. So keep in mind that the data and how you measure and look at things can be quantitative and qualitative. Another piece to that, right, post collection of data is how we review and validate it. And so what we really want to do to hone in on an evidence-based practice is disaggregate the data. You want to start breaking it down, see who you're serving. And there's various ways you can break that down from a demographic perspective, but also to academic intent, program of study, location, modality of your course offerings, or whatever it may be. But a key thing is to disaggregate the data and look at those pockets of students and what they're doing. You also want to ensure integrity. So one of the biggest recommendations that we have is work with your IR offices. That's going to make sure that the data is coming from a place that's trusted, that's been reviewed, and that it's coming from, these systems which they can pull out of. And so ensuring that integrity is a major component when we're looking at evidence-based practices. You also want to analyze that data. You want to look at those data, the metrics, and you want to scour it for results. And in that analysis, I always recommend, bring other eyes to the data. They bring, others from other units, whether if you're in a student affairs unit or academic affairs, exchange that data, get different perspectives on it through that analysis process. And then obviously, right, assessing that data, looking at, are we establishing baselines? Are we looking at comparison groups? How did the intervention or service compare and assess towards those desired outcomes, but also some comparison groups as well? And then finally, validating and disseminating that information and that data. So you want to do that internally, externally, and I'm going to say this most importantly with those key decision makers. We want to make sure that those key stakeholders are getting the information, they understand the importance of your practice, and that evidence will help support it, and sharing it with them will be key to that. All right. And to tie in, this is from the previous example of the Super Saturday registration events. When we looked at that initiative and that service, we looked at data from our SIS and we looked at it from our line management system. So we were pulling that from trusted sources. We then broke that data down. We disaggregated it, right? We looked at demographics. We looked at registration data. So when students were registering, we looked at multiple different terms and parts of terms at that registration data. We looked at service interactions and then post-service surveys to get that student voice. So those were the types of data we've used and that you could use in your practice. Through that analysis, right, after we collected the data and implemented the intervention, we could see we hit our desired outcomes with primarily serving Hispanic or Latino students, males new to college, that part-time student. So it really helped us look at and be intentional about who we served. And then when we analyzed and looked at the outcomes, we can see that 75% of those students who came to one of those events actually enrolled in classes on day one. And then out of that group of students who enrolled, we were able to see at census date, 97% of those students remained enrolled at that time. So that's another metric beyond just first day enrollment. And then finally, we looked at persistence. So we were able to compare the persistence of the group that attended these events against students who did not. And we can see we had a 1% increase there. And then going back to that student voice, 92% of the participants were satisfied with the engagement and the services they received at that event. And then finally, when we think about the social and navigational capital perspective, what we really found is the students let us know that they felt respected, they had courtesy in the service, they received that clarification and understanding of next steps. So not only did we connect with them socially, but we were able to give them a very clear understanding of onboarding, enrolling at college, and their next steps in the classroom.
Whew, that was a lot of information, right? We gave you the purpose of the evidence-based practice process. Thank you, Dr. Ariano, for giving us examples of what it looks like to collect data, analyze data, understand data, present the data, and also collect data from different sources, right? I think something that we have learned in the few years that we've been doing this is that some things that we've heard are, I don't know where to get this data. I don't know where to find this data. The data is there. The data is out there. There's also like national organizations like HACU and Education or Ed en Excelencia that also present a large kind of national landscape of the HSI context that you can source for your work if that's something that you'd like to do. So that's just something to consider as you kind of think about what programs you want to submit or what programs you would like to nominate that you know are doing some really great work. We wanted to offer you, so these are not all of the application questions, but these are just some of them that we'd like for you to start maybe thinking about, ideating over. And we'll give you some of the timelines for submissions and that process in just a little bit. But this is kind of some of the information that we're looking for, right? We want to understand, what does the data that you have, that you've collected, that you've compiled, what does that data reveal about your program? How do you know it works? How do you know it's working for your demographic and under the circumstances or the context that you're in? We also think it's really important, in order for us to really invest in serving this, that we understand who we're serving, right? So we want you to describe with intention your demographic, the demographic of students that you're serving, so that we can kind of understand the programs that are working for your students too. The other thing is that we really have to tether this work in serving this. A lot of us at this point know what this means, and if anything, maybe through your programs have strengthened your understanding of serving this. But we want you to think about that. How are you advancing serving this for your students, for your community, within the context of your institution, and what does serving this mean to you? So we're not asking for, a dissertation on this work, but we really want to understand how you're doing this work with intention. The other thing that we've also learned, and David kind of has alluded to, the value of partnership, right? You kind of talked about the value of connecting with your institutional research office. It's really important for us to connect this work to the institution, to the students, to other programs, like kind of collaborating across the boundaries there. So another thing that we want to know is, what is your institution doing to support this program and initiative? How are they supporting you? And how might this work help to, how might their support institutionalize your program? So these are just some of the example questions that are in the application. Again, not all of them, but just to kind of get the juices flowing for you, right? So the full application, and again, I'll give you the timeline in the next slide, is will consist of all of this information, right? Your constitution, your contact information, the institutional overview, including some of the example questions, and an overview of the program and initiative, what the overarching student impact is, and data, right? We're hoping that this process honors both quantitative and qualitative forms of evidence, acknowledging that stories, focus groups, national data metrics, and student voices really are powerful evidence-based, or identify powerful evidence-based practices. So this is our full EBP nomination process timeline. We launched the call for nominations at our 4th annual AZHSI Summit 2 weeks ago at Arizona Western Community College in Yuma, Arizona. We launched it there. It will close in December. I believe our timeline is December 1st, Paulette. December 1st is our hard and fast nomination timeline. You will have access to all this webinar information, and then we're available too to answer any questions if you have any questions between now and when it's due. And then the decisions will be rendered in January. So January 9th is our decision deadline. And then we'll begin promoting programs and scheduling the webinars at that point. But let me go back a bit. After you submit in December, the applications are reviewed by subject matter experts, and they are vetted too. So we're going to be putting out a call for reviewers later on today and open it up to anyone within AZHSI, but also education, nonprofit leaders, maybe community orgs, nonprofit organizations, to come serve as reviewers for these submissions. We've had no problem in years past acquiring a large group of reviewers to help us in this process. That's kind of another tenet of the AZHSI Consortium, is that it's really based on this foundation of a community of practice, right? And people have contributed to a lot of our initiatives from across the state in a really intentional way. So just so that you know that these submissions are going to be reviewed by subject matter experts that are also vetted and are also volunteering their time to support the advancement of these evidence-based practices within our context of our AZHSIs. So after they do all that, and you're now awarded, your ABP is, you've been notified January 9th that you're amazing, that you gave us all the data, all the stories, and we wanna gas you up, right? We'll start promoting these programs starting January with scheduling of webinars, right? These are gonna be 30-minute webinars where you get to speak on it, right? We're gonna pass the mic. Tell us what you did, tell us what works for whom, under what circumstances, what the impacts were, how this moved you and inspired you to continue on to do this, to do more great work, right? And those will all be posted on our social media, on our website. We'll be talking about you in our annual report. We also want to be really mindful that, again, just kind of sharing the information with the masses, that you get a special invite to present your work at our 5th annual AZHSI Summit next year, fall 2026. And then, so let's move on to the next slide. As I'm sharing all this stuff too, please feel free to put any questions that you might have in the chat, in the Q&A function. We are gonna have some time towards the end for a Q&A to share, to kind of field any questions that you might have. So here are the hard deadlines. Please feel free to take a picture of this, screenshot it, scan the QR code. This takes you directly to our website. And when you're there, you'll also have access to all of our past awardee information. You'll have access to the programs that have been awarded in years past, 12 so far, and access to the webinars from this year's awardees that I'll talk about in just a second. So just give you like another 5 seconds to scan this QR code. Okay, I think that's good. All right, so I wanted to share some of the work that's been, kind of promoted as our evidence-based practice awardees. This is one of our first here that I'd like to share with you, just kind of give you an overarching view so you have kind of an understanding of what's been awarded, and consider maybe if you have something similar that you'd like to submit. These three have 3 very different identifying characteristics. Let me put my glasses on because I don't know who I think I am without them. This one is Project Outreach Familia that's housed within the University of Arizona. The focus of this program is to increase college enrollment and degree attainment for Hispanic and low-income students in the context of Southern Arizona. And they've done a lot of great work at strengthening their outreach. They've been working with families. It's a bilingual based program and outreach and recruitment and retention program as well. So they've really kind of approached it at different angles to be really intentional about and understanding the demographic that they are trying to work with. So on this slide, you'll see how they've presented their data, how they're showing how they've moved the needle, right? And here are a few of their impact highlights. This is from the webinar that they hosted this past year. Here you can see just, kind of simply put, their college enrollment growth up by 25%, right? Up by 28%, up by 30%. That's evidence. And so as they talk about their data, they share how they've done that in their webinar. Their webinar, if you have a moment and you scan that QR code, and we'll share that website with you later too, is very touching. These are 2 mothers, 2 Latina scholar practitioners that have really done this work in a way that is informed by their own heart and their own lived experiences too. And that matters as we present our evidence-based practices, in addition to how you lay out the data here. So our next example of our EBP awardees that were nominated this year is our Blue Chip Leadership Experience. So this is also housed within the context of the University of Arizona, and their focus is to develop leadership, teamwork, career building skills through classes, workshops, and community building events. Thus far, they've supported over 600 students annually. This is a collaboration with the enrollment management team too. So again, talking about the community of practice, right? The partnership, what it means like to boundary broker and work with people across the aisle, and how that can also contribute to more sustainable student impact. And again, their focus is on recruitment, enrollment, degree attainment, especially from historically marginalized backgrounds. This is how they've presented their data, and you can see again their growth in the students that they've served. So clear evidence of the impact of their program that they're presenting through quantitative data. But if you watch their webinar, they talk about all the qualitative data that they've collected too, through focus groups, through storytelling, through journaling with their students, and how they've used that to inform their evidence-based practices. The other thing that I want to highlight with this program is in their process of collecting their data to submit to this nomination process, they had the data that they needed to also submit to the Ed en Excelencias program to watch, right? So a lot of this data that you collect as you nominate yourself, another program, or you submit to this process can be utilized for other awardee processes, or even in some cases, some of our awardees have utilized the data that they've collected for this process to submit for small and large scale federal and non-federal funding. So I'd like for you to think big too, right? As you prepare and you ready your program and all your data and all your evidence, think about how it can grow and how much more access to other opportunities that you can have through this nomination process. And this is our third EBP awardee. It's the Grow Your Own network through the Northern Arizona University. And the gap that they're attending to is the regional teacher shortage, right? So the focus of their program is to build a local pipeline of certified teachers by offering accessible, accredited degree programs leading towards teacher certification. And again, if you look at their website and you watch the webinar, it's just 30 minutes. You'll hear the program manager, the PI for this program, really talking about the stories of the students in this certification process and the things that they've overcome, their lived experience, and how they bring their lived experiences into these programs. And this program really helped to they really help to integrate their lived experience into the program as well. So some of the data that they collected started by understanding what the barriers were. Why does this gap exist, right? And how can we attend to the gap first and foremost? So as they collected their data, pre-survey data, demographic data, institutional data, they started to understand the barriers and quickly started to actively address the barriers for students. So I don't have percentage points for you, but I wanted to show you how data is presented in a different kind of modality here by showing you that these are the barriers that they've been able to address with the data that they collected, and this is what they presented in their webinar, right? They've been able to create summer accelerated terms and different options to, again, attend to the lived experiences of their students. They've been able to understand the value of allowing for part-time and full-time enrollment options when possible, increasing scholarship options, and FAFSA completion support too. So I just kind of wanted to give you a broad overview of our 3 awardees for our 2024 cycle and inspire you to submit your EBP nominations for this cycle. And I wanted to reiterate what the purpose of this process is, and really so we can solidify this. The purpose of this evidence-based practice nomination process is to create a community-informed process to identify, review, catalog, highlight, and share evidence-based practices within an HSI context in our state, right? And again, really being 10 toes down on what works for whom, under what conditions, utilizing data as a method for storytelling and acknowledging really how amazing we are and all of our efforts to advance student success for our students at our AZHSIs too. So our hope is that the result of this process is more inclusive, culturally responsive, and we have a broader understanding of evidence grounded in the realities of different HSI campuses. So if you're thinking about a program right now, your program, another program, and you want to talk a little bit more about it, you can reach out to us, reach out to me and Paulette and Dr. Ariano as well to ask if what you have applies, or ask for maybe some additional support, because again, we really want to know what's going on in our state, which means that we have to broaden access to this information from different HSIs. We really want to increase our submissions for this year and beyond. So please do consider applying. And we do our best to gas you up. We do our best to catalog this work, to highlight this work, to present this work, and to give you the opportunity to do the same. Speak on it, talk about what you're doing that's amazing, and give everybody an opportunity to learn from you and hopefully apply what's working for you within their context too. And stay connected, because we are constantly all over all of these things here, sharing our information constantly.
Yes, I also shared more links to our website listserv, each of the initiatives websites. So please feel free to explore and reach out if you have any questions.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Hope you have a nice weekend. Thank you for joining us.